The month of Elul, which is this month, which we're in right now, the word itself alludes to something which Shlomo Melech tells us in Shir Hashirim, undiluted even though lead. I am to my beloved and my beloved to me is to me. What does that mean? That if you indicate that you want to have a relationship with Hashem, that you are to your beloved, you're willing to make sacrifices for Hashem, Hashem is there all the way for you. Dodi li. Chazal use a term, if tiftach lo pesach machat. If you open an opening like the eye of a needle, or teshuvah shamachat, like the point of a needle, Hashem says, "Ani eftecha pesach kepesach ulam." I will open for you an entranceway like as large as a banquet room. All you have to do to make an opening, no more than the pin of a needle, the point of a needle, or the eye of a needle. That's the only initiative we have to take. Hashem will take it the rest of the way. Meaning, the Gemara tells us in two locations that if not for Hashem's intervention, it is impossible to survive the machinations of the evil inclination. Sofa, Roshet Sofa, Lahamis Tzadik. The evil one is lurking to kill the Tzadik. Hashem owes alone. God helps the Tzadik. If not for God's intervention to protect you from his machinations, to give you a degree of clarity, it's impossible to beat him. That's how wily the evil inclination is. He can wrap us ties and knots, and we don't even realize how bound we are hand and foot. You have to merit Siyata-Dishmaya, divine inspiration. You have to be you need divine intervention to have a sense of what's right and what's wrong, to make the right decision, and have the ability to be committed to that decision, not to regress. Elul is a month, we know, the Gemara tells us in Rosh Hashanah, based on a pasuk, the Navi says, Dishu Hashem b'motza karov v'yoseh karov. You should seek out Hashem when he's found. Dishu Hashem b'motza karov v'yoseh. You should call to him when he's close. Seek him out when he's available, and call to him when he's close. So the Gemara says that's Asar Yomim bein Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippurim. That's the 10-day period. Meaning the closest, the most intimate moment that we have with Hashem, and as the Rambam says in his teshuvah, that even an individual who calls out, even though you don't have the schus hatzibur, Hashem will respond. That is the level of closeness Hashem has to every Jew. But Elul, although it's not at that level, but it's a special level. That if you take initiative to show that you have an interest in a relationship, Hashem will take it all the way. Now, what's the allusion? Where do we find Elul alluded to? What we call it remez. There's a pasuk in Torah which we read a few weeks ago. Hashem says, Moshe Rabbeinu says to Klal Yisrael, Umal Hashem es levavcha es levavcha. Umal Hashem es levavcha. God will circumcise your hearts and the hearts of your children. Now, the letters Umal Hashem es levavcha. That's Aleph Lamed. That's Aleph Lamed. U levav. That's Vav Lamed. Zarecho. So we have the words, the letters of Elul are spelled in this pasuk. Hashem will circumcise your hearts and the hearts of your children. So what is the circumcision of the heart? Circumcision of the heart is teshuvah. Hashem gives us the ability to have the capacity to see things clear enough that we can make decisions to take control of our lives. That's an allusion to teshuvah. That during the month of Elul, one should do teshuvah. So you say it's not so simple. It's not that simple. Now, what is the degree of Siyata-Dishmaya one merits during the month of Elul? The Ramban writes on that posuk, Umal Hashem is levavcha. When will Hashem remove the covering of our hearts and the heart of our children? That's after Moshe Mashiach. The Ramban writes that at the end of time, when the Mashiach will come, all evil will come to an end. There will no longer be evil in the world. Mankind will no longer have an interest in doing anything which is contrary to the will of Hashem. All mankind will naturally gravitate only to Torah mitzvahs, nothing but that. We will not have any interest other than that. When is that? When Hashem will remove the foreskin of your hearts and the hearts of your children. The foreskin is the blockage. That's the Ramban. So where does the Torah allude to the value of Elul in this pasuk? Why did Torah choose this pasuk? Umal Hashem es levavcha. To tell us, to give us an appreciation, what is the level and the quality of that Siyata-Dishmaya? The Torah is telling us that it has a semblance of what's going to happen after Moshe Mashiach, where evil will no longer exist. When evil no longer exists, a person will have a natural inclination, a natural pull to be drawn towards spirituality. That's going to happen after Mashiach comes. Elul, that same draw, a semblance of that draw exists. A person can be naturally drawn to that. Except, how does it happen? Undiluted. You just have Pesach. If you take initiative, even to a small degree, I'll take it all the way. That's undiluted. There's a mitzvah, although it's a mitzvah, it's a time-oriented mitzvah. It's one of the exceptions that a woman is obligated. What is that mitzvah? Kiddush is one example of mitzvah that a woman's obligated. A woman has an obligation to hear Kiddush on Shabbos. Eating matzah at the Seder, a woman has an obligation, although it's mitzvah. And the third one is hatel. Every 8th year, after the Shnas HaShmita, after the sabbatical year, on the first night of Chol Hamoed Sukkos, the Melech Yisrael, all Jews gather in the Beis HaMikdash, Anoshim V'taf, men, women, and children, and the king sits in the sanctuary and he reads Mishnah Torah. What's the value of reading of the Mishnah Torah? Man yishmu v'yilamdu liras Hashem Elokecha. They should listen and learn to fear Hashem. That's the value of what? Of listening to Hakel. That's the value. That's the value of this mitzvah saseh. Although it's a zman groma, it's time determined, a woman has the obligation. Man yishmu v'lamdu liras Hashem. Now, what precedes the 8th year? Shemitah. What exactly happens in Shemitah during the sabbatical year? So the Torah tells us that during Shemitah, it's Shabbos L'Hashem. You have to dedicate the year to Hashem. All in an agricultural society, all agricultural activity comes to a standstill. You're not permitted to work the land at any level. It's Shabbos L'Hashem. It's to commemorate Maaseh Bereshis. Hashem is the creator. And what does it mean? Shabbos L'Hashem. So the Sefarno on that pasuk explains Shabbos L'Hashem. It's a year you have to dedicate to what? To tefillah and limud Torah. You reflect on your relation with Hashem. You study Torah. and avodas Hashem, service of Hashem. That's what you do during this year. You dedicate the year to Hashem. That's what it is. Just as an aside, remez simple with Vince writes, we know that on Yom Tiv, Ochel Nefesh is permitted. Food-related activities are permitted. Shabbos, they're not permitted. So what does that indicate? So remez simple with Vince writes in the Meshech Chochmah that the concept of Shabbos is Beinod Lamokom. You have to focus on our relation with Hashem. Yom Tiv, that transporting from domain to domain, preparing fresh food, baked goods, whatever it may be, the emphasis is on Beinod L'Chaveiro. Yom Tiv is Beinod L'Chaveiro. Shabbos L'Hashem is Beinod Lamokom. Reflecting, meditating, studying, praying, that's Beinod Lamokom. So it's a Sephorno writes, what's Shabbos L'Hashem? The sabbatical year? That's exactly, invest the year in that. So I always had a question. If we would be setting the order of how to dedicate a year, L'Avodas Hashem, to serve Hashem, you would think that you'd have a Rosh Hashanah, Day of Judgment, a teshuvah, Yom Kippur, Yom Slicha V'Kapara, and then you have Sukkot, which commemorates the Amei HaKavod, and right after the first day, Yom Tiv, you go to the Temple Mount, and you hear Mishnah Torah, Man Yishmu V'Yildu B'Yiras Hashem. After that, you're all charged, and you have this orientation for spirituality. Now you go into a year of the sabbatical year, and dedicate the year for Hashem. Avodas Hashem, right? If we would be setting the sequential order, that's what seemingly that's what we would set it. Torah says no. First, you spend a year, the sabbatical year, which is Shabbos Hashem, and after that, you go through an Elul, the last month of that year, and then you have a Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur with teshuvah, and then you have the first day of Sukkot, which is commemorating Ani Yaakov, the clouds of glory, and then after all this, you go to the Temple Mount, you listen to the Mishnah Torah being read by the king. Now you go to listen to fear God. If the whole idea is to fear Hashem, seemingly if everything would have been predicated on that, you'd invest the year differently, learning. But the Torah says that's not the order. So what's the Torah telling us? The Torah is telling us you could hear pearls of wisdom. You could hear Moshe off the mountain. But if you don't have the orientation, you don't have the orientation to be able to have the capacity to appreciate what's been said, it falls, it's like water off a duck's back. It falls on deaf ears. It doesn't make its impact. So what is the orientation? To give the Jew the capacity to be impressed when you go to the Mokum HaMikdash and you hear the king reading Mishnah Torah. And the objective is Liyiras Hashem Elokecha, to fear God. You have to have all these prerequisites preceding it, a year of Torah and meditation, an Elul, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, only after all that level of orientation, exposure, now you're ready for real time. Now you have a capacity when you hear the king reading Mishnah Torah in the Azoram, on the Temple Mount, now you have the capacity to appreciate and absorb whatever's being said. That's what you see. This you see there clearly from the sequential order of Shemitah, Elul, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and then Sukkot, and then you have the Mishnah Torah. You have Ahakel. Now people. So Elul is really a preparatory month. It's a month for us today. We don't have the Shemitah, we don't have Hakel, we don't live in agricultural society. But what the Torah is telling us, that just to jump into something, as much as we understand what it is, as a human being, we need orientation. If you have an orientation, you have a capacity. You have no orientation, as much as you understand it, it doesn't affect you in the same way. Elul Adila Dodi Vidodi League. It's available. The divine assistance is there, but you have to take initiative. Adila Dodi. You take initiative, even a small degree of initiative. Tiftach li Pesach kechudah shel machat. No larger than the point of a needle or the eye of a needle. And the Eftach Pesach Ulam. I'll give you a sensitivity which is overwhelming that you'll appreciate it. And now, because you've taken advantage of that, you go into Rosh Hashanah, which is Yom Adin, which is Disha Hashem B'Motzo. This is the beginning of what? Seeking out Hashem when he's found. Krov Yosakorov. And as the Mishabura cites, that as we go further and further, deeper into the teshuvah, the intensity of that Siyata-Dishmaya increases as we get closer to Yom Kippur. So it's building. It's giving us a greater capacity. But to be able to appreciate what the Rosh Hashanah is, person has no preparation before Rosh Hashanah. And you got your mussar on the bookshelf, and you take it out. I don't care what kind of commentary you have in it. You have art scroll, interlinear, whatever it is. Unless you reflect on what Rosh Hashanah is. As much as you could immediately get involved, if you would have had the preparation, it's a different level of involvement. You have a different capacity to appreciate what that is. It's not comparable. Tells us that Torah is nimshal l'shlosha mashkim. Torah is compared to 3 liquids. Yayin, cholov, yayin, mayim, yayin, v'cholov. Water, wine, and milk. What water? Water, when it flows from a higher elevation to a lower elevation. You have to have you have to have humility, to have the capacity to be the repository of the Torah. That's first level. Yayin, wine, has to retain its characteristics of wine. You can't have any other things intermingling with that. Even gold vessels will cause the wine to spoil. It has to be in its pristine state. Cholov, the Gemara says that any level of uncleanliness falls in there, the milk is ruined. So for it to be potable, the milk, it has to be kept, that no foreign substance should fall in there. Otherwise it spoils. That's what Torah is. It has to be kept at that pristine level. But if it's not Deut Shvolo, if you're not a humble guy, whatever Torah is, you may be impressed with its intellectualism. But in terms of to be impacted by the innate spirituality which lies in Torah, you're not going to be impacted. Because you have to be humble. If you have the quality of humility, it will affect you. You don't have it, it'll affect you. You may appreciate its profoundness, intellectually speaking, but in terms of to make a difference in your life, to change you, it's not going to change you. When you start Rosh Hashanah without preparation, you understand it's God's kingship, it's the day God created Adam, so on, with everything. It brings back memories. But to be able to internalize it, to live it and be affected by it, and that as a result of that experience, it's going to make a difference in your life, because you're going to be able to make changes. That's only if you have the level of preparation from before. Without that, it's not going to happen. Unless you live your whole life as an Oved Hashem. You live a whole life as an Oved Hashem. Every day you're doing teshuvah. Every day you're reflecting on all these issues. But a person who's involved in the material world, and without any level of preparation, you shift from the material to this immediately in there. As I said, relatively speaking, it's like water off a duck's back. It's not going to penetrate you. Although your mind, you appreciate, you hear those tunes, immediately brings back memories. You're touched emotionally. But to go beyond that, it does not, it's not comparable to what could have been if you would have made the preparations. By Svardim, they start saying Slichos Elul. Aleph Elul, they start saying slichos. That's in preparation for what? For Rosh Hashanah. Because they understand, that's minig the Svardim. Without a month preparation, you're not going to be able to maximize on the value of experiencing a Rosh Hashanah. They need a full month. Ashkenazim, minimally you need 4 days. As it's cited, just as a korban, you examine it for a mum, for blemishes of over 4 days. Identically, we must do that internal examination, reflecting introspection minimally for 4 days. Before we go and stand before Hashem. 4 days introspection. Sometimes we have more than 4 days slichos. We have vidui, we have all kinds of tfilos, which touch upon all this in terms of making changes in our lives, speaking about who Hashem is, who we are, and who we're supposed to be. A person who trains as an athlete, if he doesn't train so many hours a day for an extended period of time, as much as he has the ability, he's not ready to enter into that competition because he's not fit. Even if he took a break for a month, he has to get into it again. Because as a human being, unless you have that orientation, that involvement, that mentoring in your mind, in your emotion, in your physicality, you have many impediments. You can't get into it. It doesn't flow. This distraction, the level of reflexiveness, of easiness, it's not easy. Anybody who studied in yeshiva, studied well, you take a vacation summer, 3 weeks, you get back after 3 weeks, after a month. The first week you're back, unless you during your vacation break, you studied a number of hours every day, you have to get back into it. You have to get back into it. You're a smart guy, it's very interesting, get back, you're into it. No, you're not back into it. It's not the same. You have to be in it for about a good few days, a week, then you start feeling what you felt before you took the break. That's just the reality of a human being. The Gemara says in Brachos, Divrei Torah tzrichin chizuk. Torah needs chizuk. Rashi says, b'chol kocho. Continuously, you have to give it your best. Unless you give it your best, it doesn't have the impact that it's supposed to have. That's what it is. We're physical beings. Every one of the inclinations is not in sync with our spirituality. The only way you could make that difference, it's like, you ever see what a pile driver is? A pile driver takes those metal beams and keeps pounding it into the ground but it keeps pounding it. If you don't keep pounding it, it doesn't penetrate the ground. You have to study it with all fully immersed. Because only then could you really wear through all the inclinations of the human being, which are contrary, which are not in sync, aligned with Kedusha, for that reason. Actually, I just explained that the month of preparation, a person has to work out, has to train. So if you have the environment, you have the equipment, so good, so you could train for whatever you have to train. But what happens if you don't have the equipment, you don't have the means to train? Conceptually speaking, you can understand it, but unless you're involved, you're not involved. Hashem gives us the means. What are the means? The means is called the month of Elul. Undiluted. And what level of assistance does he give us? It's a level of assistance which is semblance of after the coming Mashiach. As I mentioned, the Ramban says that pasuk is after bittul hara, after evil will be expunged from existence. That's the level of assistance. So he gives us the means. He gives us that location to be able to be oriented, to have relevance to that moment as if no evil exists. That's the degree that you're able to absorb what this is all about. Rabbi, shir he gave, really, it was beautiful. But why was it beautiful? Because you were intellectually stimulated by it. Did you fully understand it? Did you grasp it? Yes. Did you understand everything? Do you have any reason why what I said, it's somehow lacking in truth? No. So what's the but? You know what the but is? The but is you. That's the but. Because since you're not able to absorb it, because where you're at, you don't have the orientation, as much as you can't find any flaw in the logic or in the whole system, the question is, what relevance does it have to you? To what degree does it have relevance to you? Without the orientation, it's more and more of a problem. That's why there's the but always. So whenever we have a problem with the but, we have to understand where we're not at. We believe we're at certain places. We're not there. Of course, if you were there, you wouldn't have the but. Rabbi, I agree, but if you agree, there's no but. You fully embrace it. I told the story maybe the past 2 months, when we started with Silsa Shorim, that this person, it's brought, there's a book, 3-volume work on the Vilna Gaon, it's called Hagohim. So over there's a story brought that, the Vilna Gaon for 40 years lived in a courtyard, didn't go out of that courtyard. And he would have only his closest students there, and he would teach them. And he'd have all the minyanim in that courtyard, in his home. He would not leave that area at all. And when they would have the minyanim, only certain people were permitted to be part of the minyan, to come. So there was a certain person, this person's grandfather, was never there, but he always heard how special to pray with the Vilna Gaon, how special it was. So he asked permission, could he daven Ma'ariv during the week with the Vilna Gaon? Wanted to daven Ma'ariv. So they said he could come. So his grandfather shared with him that when he heard the Vilna Gaon say Kriya Shema, articulating the words, the way he said it, he became a different person. He became a changed person because he was touched by hearing the way the Vilna Gaon said Kriya Shema. You understand what this means? There's no question. If this person had an interest in praying with the Vilna Gaon, that means he already had orientation towards spirituality. He wanted to have that experience. He never had that experience. But if you have a capacity and you have that experience, it takes you to another level. And his grandfather said, after that day, the Kriya Shema he said was a different Kriya Shema. Because the way he was affected by hearing the way the Vilna Gaon said the Kriya Shema. I'll give you an example. We find that Yosef HaTzadik, he merited a bracha from his father, Ben Porat Yosef. Ben Porat Yosef, like, Sfardim. They say, he had a boy, they say Mabruk. A girl, they don't say Mabruk so fast. And also they say, a boy, Ben Porat Yosef. Put their hand on the chest because they're afraid of Ayin Hara. Nathan, am I accurate? I think I am. So the question is, why did he merit Ben Porat Yosef? That the evil eye does not come upon him, because initially when Yaakov was going to have the confrontation with his brother Esav, it says in all the emos and the Galachim, the concubines came before Esav, it says it was the mothers and the children. By Yosef, it says Yosef and his mother. He shielded his mother from Esav. He shielded her. He did it. So Rashi says, why did he stand before his mother? Because he didn't want the eye of Esav, the eye of that Russia, to come upon his mother, who was a beautiful woman. He did not want him to gaze at her beauty. But what was Yosef worried? That he would take Rachel away from Yaakov? He didn't want him to gaze at her beauty. What is it all about? Now, Rachel, his beauty was what did Rachel's beauty represent? Kedusha. The Gemara tells us in Babasha, in Zaro Shel Esav Nofel will be at Zaro Shel Rachel. Every war that we ever had with Esav, the progeny of Rachel had to be in that war. And only because of that were you able to have victory. Why? Because Rachel was the epitome of beauty, physicality. She dedicated that beauty to Hashem totally. She was the main matriarch. Rachel was the main matriarch. She's the Akeres Abaya, she's the Ikro Shabbai, she's the primary part of Klal Yisrael. So she took her beauty and subordinated it and subjugated it to Kedusha. Esav is physicality. So who dominates physicality? Rachel. Therefore, as a result of that, whenever there's a battle between the Jews and Klal Yisrael and Esav, Zaro Shel Rachel have to be there because they have the ability to subjugate physicality. This is how I explained it. So now, when Esav looked at Rachel's beauty, what did he see? He saw something beautiful, and through what kind of lens? Through a sexual lens. You know what that is? That's Chil Hashem. Could you imagine you have a Sefer Torah, beautiful script and everything. Somebody says, you know what, that reminds me of Chas v'Shalom, pornographic something. Could you imagine somebody saying that? You wouldn't let that person's eyes set their eyes on that Sefer Torah. If that's what comes to mind, it's a Chil Hashem. For Rachel to be seen by Esav, seeing it through his eyes and his mind and his emotion, Yosef didn't want him to look at her because he's not going to see it right. He's going to see it as something which is not what she is. It's the most disgraceful thing. So the way you see things, it's based on what? You understand what it's all about. You speak to a person and you try to explain to him Torah values. He says, Rabbi, I hear what you're saying, but what about? What about? Because again, Rachel is a beautiful woman. She's a pious woman. She's a devout woman. She's a this woman. She only eats Chol of Yisrael. She only eats God kosher. That's what Rachel Imeinu is. If you were somebody else, you'd understand who she was. It's not she adheres to dietary laws in the most meticulous way. She's the closest thing to a malach. That's what she is, Rachel Imeinu. Rachel's mevakal boneo. When the Jews went into Golus, Rachel was mevakal and Kol Barov and Nishma. And Hashem heard her outcries that we should come back. That's who Rachel was. But if you don't, you just see the superficiality of this. You don't begin to understand who Rachel Imeinu was. The same thing. Teshuvah, of course, I remember this, that. I remember when I was a bocher, a student, Teshuvah was this, was that. Today, we're more in the real world. In the real world. That is the real world. Unfortunately, we become jaded. And because we're so jaded, we can't somehow get beyond that. But a person who truly knows what it is, he knows where he's not at. And because he's not at that, he wants to get back as close as he can to where he should be when Rosh Hashanah begins, which is the Yom Adin. He was the closest student of the Chofetz Chaim. And he was a Rosh Hashiva. He had a yeshiva called Branovich. When he was the Rosh Hashiva Branovich, he would leave Branovich, Rosh Chodesh Elul, and spend Yom Tov with the Chofetz Chaim until after Sukkot. We talk about a man, he was ready in his 50s, in his 60s. He already was a Gadol Ador. He felt he had to be with the Chofetz Chaim, his Rebbe, from Rosh Chodesh Elul through Sukkot.
Rabbi, who is this? Who is this? Which Rabbi? Who is?
Rabbi Hanan Wasserman,
Oh, of course, yes.
What is it all about? Because he understood. Being exposed to the Chofetz Chaim, who was a chosid, he was a malach, it's a whole different reality. But you know what Rabbi Hanan was? He was such a tzaddik, such a holy person. As holy as he was, he knew what he wasn't yet. And if the Chofetz Chaim is going to add a grace, give him a greater capacity, that's where he's going to be. But on my Rosh Hashanah, he worked it out. He took off 6 weeks not to be there, so he could be with his Rebbe. My mashgiach, I'm gonna stop in 2 minutes. My mashgiach was the closest student of Rav Kalatsky Levenstein. He was also a student of Rabbi Rucham Levovitz, Citing the Ramban. And every Shabbos, he would say what they called the mussar shus in the yeshiva. It was after Shalosh Shudas, before Ma'ariv, and on Shabbos, it was usually 45 minutes an hour. And it was something profound. With 2 weeks before Rosh Hashanah, he would not only say a shmooze on Shabbos, he would speak twice during the week. So all the shmoozing that you could still get that are recorded, they were the shmoozing he said during the week, during Elul, and during a session of teshuvah. But what do you have to say so many shmoozing? Shimi Shabbos is not enough? Because he understood, unless he adds other mussar talks, the students are not going to be at the level where they should be. They're not quite going to be ready for Rosh Hashanah. So we had to hear and what he represented, what he was. He was the ultimate role model of what a Jew should be. And Torah and Yira and everything, Avodas Hashem. So to hear that and be exposed to him a few times a week besides Shabbos, as a result of that, it was a different Rosh Hashanah. He himself was the Shlich Tzibor on Rosh Hashanah. And he was one of a kind of person when he would be mispaler, when he was the Shlich Tzibor. Okay, I'm going to stop here.